Hi guys, Ping Yao here, and you are watching episode 2 of Santa Capricia, my city skyline city. And a new series, and if you've already watched episode 1, I would recommend that you watched episode 1, which is a kind of introduction, I suppose, to the city. It's a little bit longer than I probably would have liked. I think this episode will be about 20 minutes long, which seems to be about right, really. I don't really want to go beyond 20 minutes, and the original episode was over half an hour, which I think was a bit too long, and especially just listening to my voice droning on for half an hour can't be good. So yeah, just a little bit more streamlined approach today, just giving you a taste of what I've been doing over the last week, on and off. So really just trying to finish off the this industrial area, which I forget now the name of. I think it was called North Kettering or West Kettering or something or other. I can't remember exactly, but it was on the previous episode. I had a map and I've shown a kind of like names of all the different areas. So, and this area is where I started, which, as I've explained before, is a kind of industrial area which is out of the main centre of Santa Capricia city, but it's kind of a suburb, and it's going to form what will become a vast industrial area, which will kind of hug the coastline to the south and run along the coastline. So it'll be a harbour, a kind of port, cargo container yards, everything else you can imagine in terms of industry. So there's going to be a lot of industry, and this, as I say, is a kind of northern extent pretty much, because north of here, not that you're really going to be able to see on this video, but north of this area is a kind of mountain range, I suppose, or certainly lots of hills. So the industry is really going to just stop. And what I'm probably going to be doing once the industry stops there is to start building some kind of residential suburbs, which, I haven't really concentrated on at this stage. I've just been building these kind of industrial warehouses and yards and things. So you can see with these, what I'm moving around there is an asset editor created asset, and it's effectively using different props to then create one asset, and then importing that into the game. So I've got a kind of library, like a collection of these kind of resources that I could just import in and plonk down. So I find this is a really good way to develop and fill these industrial areas, because I do struggle sometimes in terms of just what to put in to these industrial areas. There's only so many warehouses and yards and car parks you can put in. You do end up, I find, with lots of big grey concrete everywhere. So yeah, it's just finding a way to sort of break it up and give it a sense of place, a sense of reality. But on the whole, I think this area turned out quite well. In the previous episode I was building a lot more, and also a power station and power lines and things like that, and you'll see that just a minute ago I was playing around with another power line, just putting one in, but I do quite like to have those power lines there. They're not really serving any purpose. The city has ample electricity, but I just like the look of them, because you do get power lines on most roads, so it just gives it just gives it a little bit of interest. So one thing I've found the other day, which stupidly should have realised, but this is actually a game, and I forgot that it was a game, which sounds nuts, but I basically neglected to focus on some of the requirements that the game needs me to focus on. So for example, I didn't really have any fire stations, so I opened the game the other day and loaded it, and I thought, what's happened here? Because half of my city looked like this. There we go, half of it had burnt down. So even though I'm not playing the game as the game, I'm using it as a kind of building software program, to design my own city. You still have to make sure that you're keeping track of, the different processes that are running along in the background. So now I'm making sure I'm laying down lots of fire stations just to make sure that stuff doesn't start burning down. I didn't notice that the thing had burnt down at all, but there you go. Now, what we're doing here is I just deleted that freeway junction because it was a workshop asset which I downloaded and it looked really good, and I thought that's probably the way to go because it saves me a lot of time. But there again is a lot of segments and props and things on it, a lot of decals on it, which I just thought I'm going to lose. I don't need them. I'll make my own junctions, my own interchanges, which means I got complete control, and by deleting those junctions I actually saved myself about 300 odd props and segments and stuff. So I've managed to claw back on the on my limits there a little bit, which it's in the back of my mind, but I'm trying to not get too hung up about that, because I think there's a few things in the pipeline which I'm pretty sure will make that will negate that as being an issue for me. So this is really just trying to finish off some of these little details underneath the bridge there, which you can't really seem to get bridges that do that in the workshop, so I tend to make my own versions and adding a few little details here and there, but that looks a bit like it's just floating in midair, to be honest, so I'll probably go back and delete that. But I'm kind of at the stage now where I'm realizing that if I'm going to get this city done, I can't go totally crazy on the detail. I can't get so obsessed with the detail and adding everything in, because I'm just not going to have enough time to do it, because I don't have, I'm not doing this as a job. I have only a few hours every day, if that, to do the city. So I have to make sure that I'm not going down a road where I'm not going to be able to finish it, or at least get it into some kind of a something that looks half decent. It's a compromise, really. You got to balance it, the detail that you need to put in against the details you just don't need to put in, and half the stuff I'm adding in, you're never really going to see it, but as you can see here, I'm getting a bit carried away with the vegetation, but actually that to me I think makes quite a big difference, and particularly because this city is what I imagined it would be, a Southern Californian city. So the vegetation is going to be quite a lot of scrub, a lot of kind of grasses and shrubberies and things like that, and then palm trees and so forth. So there's not going to be a huge amount of trees in the city, but there is going to be quite a lot of this sort of low vegetation. But saying that, I think probably on the hills, on the mountains, I'll start to maybe add some forests in, maybe some sort of coniferous pine trees, things like that, because I think that sort of contrast could look quite nice, and you do get that in California, particularly sort of LA. You get those big sort of forests up on the mountains there, but in the city itself, just keep it a little bit more, I guess it's a little bit semi-arid. It's quite a dry sort of a place in terms of environment. So again, another car park. I probably do too many of these, but to be honest with you, when you do look at LA again as an example, if you look at LA on Google Maps, there's so many parking lots and areas like that. So it is what the States has a lot of. So I'm not going to just put buildings in, when I think actually a parking lot would make more sense there. And particularly here, because there's going to be a station just a little way along from this car park, so I kind of envisage that this might be the parking lot for this station. And the railway line that runs along the city, I mean, that railway line was one of the first things I actually put in to the city. I did that before the first episode was recorded, and I put that in because in the past I've built cities and I've either just forgotten or neglected to put things like railway lines in, and ended up having to kind of delete half the city to then get a railway line to work. And also then it doesn't really look very convincing because it looks as if the railway line has just been sort of shoehorned in. So with this city, what I want to do is really try and lay down where my sort of railway lines and connections, you know, freeways and everything are going as I go before I start building things, because I think then I can get a much more realistic sort of a city kind of plan in terms of, you know, how everything's laid out, rather than it just looking a little bit kind of contrived and having, you know, railway lines inserted where there wouldn't be a railway line. But this railway line I think is probably going to be a commuter line now. Originally I was thinking it would probably be a freight line, but because it's such a sort of central line, it runs due north of what will be downtown and the harbour. I guess it probably makes more sense for it to become a commuter line. Although, I mean, I'm still a little bit open as to what it will be eventually, but we'll have to see. But yeah, so there's a lot to do, and I think with this area, once this area is completed, which hopefully at the end of this episode it's pretty much completed, I can start focusing in on extending the kind of infrastructure. So trying to work out a little bit more as to the positioning and where those connections are all going. Because although I've got a map and I've got something in my head as to where everything is going to be, it never quite pans out when you start planting roads and railways down. I find with these maps, it's almost best to let the map kind of guide you to some extent, particularly because just north of here I've got a lot of mountains and hills, so I'm going to be terraforming a lot of that, but I don't want to lose all of that. So I generally want to keep the hills where they are, which means that all of the freeways and the railways and everything else are going to have to work with those hills. So that's why I'm now thinking I've got to really try to focus in on where all that's going to be, where that's all going to be going. But saying that, I'm also quite keen on just extending this industrial area further south as well. I might well do that in the next episode. We'll have to see. Just because I want to add a little bit more industry. This is just the start of the industry. That's the reality of the matter. There's going to be a lot more. So I'm also, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, I'd quite like to just break the back of that, just to get a bit more industry down, maybe. And if I go to the south of here, that's just a big flat plain. So it's not really gonna matter too much if I don't know exactly where all my railways and everything are going. So I think probably I'll be doing that. So you're seeing here this is the station, which is going down, and it looks quite good. The only thing I was a little bit concerned about, and I think this is probably because I was still thinking maybe it would be more like a freight terminal or something, was just those glass roofs looked a bit too glassy. And what I thought I'd do is put I think, is it a shed or something, a shed roof over them, so it sort of disguises them a bit, and it just makes it look a bit more sort of utilitarian, a bit more industrial. I mean, now I'm thinking if it's going to be a commuter station, then maybe I should remove them, but I'm not sure. I quite like them in a way, and it just tones the station down a little bit. It just makes it almost blend in a little bit more. So I think I might decide to keep them. So we're getting towards the end of the episode now, and really just finishing off this area, and so hopefully once I've got these sort of roads in and so forth, this will be a sort of final kind of like, okay, I've done this bit now. I can concentrate on something else, because that's the thing with the game. I do stumble a little bit because I tend to like to get a particular area done, and then I feel like I can move on to another area. I'm not one for darting about different areas. I'd prefer to get one area finished so that it looks all done and polished and everything, and then move to the next part. And I guess that's a slightly unusual way of doing it. I don't know, maybe not, but I think what would be nice if I could try to build up an overview of the city more, at least get areas blocked out and mapped out, and then focus in on particular areas, because at the moment the city is literally just this area, and there's nothing else around it. But then again, everybody has their own way of working. Everyone has their own way of building these cities. So I just kind of like trying to keep it fairly sort of organic in terms of how it's being developed. Those car parking spaces look really wonky. Now I'm looking at this, they look really wonky. That's really bugging me. I'm going to have to go back and adjust those, I think. But anyway, we are virtually at the end of this episode, which hopefully has given you some kind of a entertainment value, maybe, I don't know, but hey ho. Episode 3 will be coming out maybe in a week's time, so until then, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll leave you with a little bit of cinematics and bid you farewell. See you next time.